My daughter toasted her stepfather to my face. So I got up and left. I told my daughter just one thing. Do not bring your stepfather to the birthday dinner. She laughed and called me jealous and insecure. She invited him anyway, and that night he was named the guest of honor. When it was time for her speech, she toasted her stepfather and said he was the best thing that ever happened to her. I smiled and walked out immediately. What happened next was quite unexpected. I raised her alone after her mother left. That's not a line I say to win sympathy. It's a truth that settles in my chest like concrete. I was 33 years old. I was grieving, newly single, and holding a 2-year-old girl in my arms who looked at me as if I were her entire world. And for years, I was 3 a.m. diaper changes and 9 a.m. board meetings. Ballet recitals followed by dozens of client meetings, trying to scrape together enough money to start my first company, all while making sure she never felt the absence of a mother. I gave her stability, I gave her vacations, good schools, even a damn pony at one point. And every time someone praised her smile or her intelligence, I felt like I was doing something right, that I was enough. So imagine spending nearly 2 decades being enough, only to wake up one day and realize you've been quietly replaced. I started to notice the shift when she turned 16. That's when her mother, after more than a decade of sporadic birthday calls and Christmas cards, decided to reinvent herself as the loving mother. With that transformation came her new husband, a man with a dazzling smile and the uncanny ability to insert himself into any story as if he had always belonged there. He wasn't abusive, he wasn't loud or overbearing. In fact, that made it worse. He was polite, too polite. The kind of man who asks if you're okay with him hugging your daughter, and then hugs her anyway. I don't hate the man, that would give him too much credit. But I never liked him. Not out of jealousy, despite what my daughter would later say, but because I saw what he was doing, erasing the role I had maintained with blood, sweat, and tears. By the time she turned 23, he was at every gathering. At her graduation, he sat next to me. When she moved into her first apartment, he helped with the move-in, and every time, I would repeat to myself, "Don't make it about you." I would swallow the lump in my throat, shake his hand, and smile for the pictures. I didn't want to be the petty father, I just wanted to see her happy. That was my currency, her happiness, her peace. But peace is not peace if it comes at the cost of self-respect. I wish I had understood that sooner, because by the time her 25th birthday came around, I found myself making a single, simple request. Don't bring your stepfather to the dinner I'm hosting for you. I said it gently over coffee as if it were no big deal. I even let out a small laugh to keep it light. But I meant it, every syllable. I needed one night, just one, where I didn't have to sit across from the man who had become the hero in my daughter's story. She laughed when I said it. A loud, full-throated laugh, as if I'd told a joke. You're being insecure, she said. Jealous, even. That doesn't look good on you. The words stung, not because they were cruel, but because of the ease with which she said them, as if I were a footnote in her emotional hierarchy. I didn't argue. I just said, it's your decision, but if he comes, I'll know where I stand. She took that lightly too. She told me not to be dramatic, that it was her day and she had the right to invite anyone who made her feel loved. That word, loved, echoed long after she hung up. It stayed with me all week as I ran errands to make her dinner perfect, as I rewrote the handwritten card over and over because I wanted it to sound perfect. Deep down, I think I already knew she wouldn't honor my request. But there's a part of every parent, especially those who have sacrificed more than they'll ever admit, that wants to believe their child will come through, that love will be enough in the end. That was my mistake. The night of the dinner was a warm California September. You know, the kind of night where the breeze carries laughter and perfume, and you almost forget how fragile it all is. I had rented a private space at her favorite restaurant. I asked the chef to prepare her favorite dishes. I even hired a string quartet because she once mentioned she loved the cello. The guests arrived, her friends, some distant relatives. I stood at the entrance, greeting them with a rehearsed kindness, scanning every face for hers. And then she walked in, smiling, radiant, and by her side, of course, was him, her stepfather, dressed like he owned the place. I didn't flinch, didn't raise an eyebrow. I just nodded. "Glad you could make it," I said, and turned to the waiter to order a drink strong enough to survive the night. Conversations buzzed around me, laughter spilling over the tables like confetti. People complimented the food, the music, the organization, and I smiled because that's what I do. I perform, I host, I make sure everyone else is comfortable, even when I'm crumbling inside. It wasn't until the speeches began that everything finally broke. She stood up, glass in hand, her eyes steady, confident, eloquent, magnetic. She thanked her friends for coming. She gave me a brief thank you for organizing everything, and then she turned to her stepfather and said, "But the real guest of honor tonight is the man who was there when it mattered most, the man who has been my rock, my inspiration, and the best thing that ever happened to my life." I don't remember if anyone clapped. I just remember the silence in my own head, deafening, as if someone had muted the TV and I was watching the scene unfold without being able to intervene. I looked around, hoping someone, anyone, would look uncomfortable, but no one did. They all raised their glasses. I smiled, stood up, walked to the door, nodded at the valet, and got in my car. I didn't drive home right away. I pulled over on a quiet street a few blocks away and just sat there, staring at the steering wheel, holding on to it like it was the only thing keeping me together. I didn't cry that night. I didn't scream. I just made a decision. People don't understand the specific kind of betrayal that comes not from strangers but from those you spend a lifetime protecting. It's quieter than you imagine. There's no shouting, no flipped tables, no dramatic exits through shattered glass and spilled wine. Sometimes, it's just the way a room goes still for you while it dances for someone else. That night, her birthday dinner was exactly Theta's stillness that told me I no longer mattered in the way I used to. And as much as I tried to convince myself to get over it, to be the bigger person, to not ruin her night, I knew in the end I couldn't pretend anymore. She had walked into that room glowing, not just beautiful but powerful, with that light people have when they know they are loved, celebrated, adored. She wore a satin blue dress that reminded me of her 6th grade talent show when she sang that song from Annie and the whole auditorium stood up to applaud. The same grace, the same spark. I remember thinking how proud I was of her before I even noticed he was right beside her, carrying her gift like a father would. That detail stuck with me. The natural way he held the gift I had wrapped for her. He placed it on the table as if it belonged to him, as if she belonged to him. No one introduced him because they didn't have to. He was already part of the landscape. I stayed quiet through the appetizers. I made polite small talk with her friends. I nodded along to old stories and empty compliments from people who clearly hadn't seen her struggle, who hadn't seen the nights I stayed up holding her through a fever or sat outside her room while she cried over a high school heartbreak. I wanted to believe I was imagining it, that maybe I was overreacting, but the moment he started telling a story about the road trip to Big Sur, I realized the story was mine. I had planned that trip 2 years ago, but he joined at the last minute because she insisted, and now, in front of all these people, he was telling it as if I had never been there. The table laughed at his version. She leaned on his shoulder, laughing, nodding, her eyes warm with memory. I looked down at my plate and felt the weight of every unpaid debt of fatherhood crushing me. I had spent days preparing for that night. Not just money, though the venue wasn't cheap, but energy, emotional attention, all poured into making her feel loved. I didn't even care about being that fun dad. I never tried to compete on charisma. I only ever wanted one thing, respect. But by the time she stood up to give her toast, I could already feel the shape of betrayal forming in my chest like a bruise. She tapped her glass, cleared her throat, and began what I thought would be a sweet, maybe slightly embarrassing speech with a few inside jokes. Instead, she started by thanking everyone who had helped make her who she was. She thanked her mother for always believing in her, and then she turned to him, her stepfather, and everything that came next was like being slowly skinned alive. "This man," she said, her voice trembling with what I assumed was emotion, "has been there for me in ways I can't even begin to explain. When I was lost, he helped me find myself. When I doubted everything, he reminded me of my worth. He has shown me what unconditional love is. Honestly, he's the best thing that ever happened to me." She raised her glass and smiled directly at him, not even glancing in my direction. The room applauded. He looked down, humbled, as if he'd just been decorated. And I felt as if I had been cleanly and effectively erased, as if I had never existed. I smiled, of course. I always do. Even when I'm dying inside, I have trained myself to smile. I waited for the applause to die down. I slowly pushed my chair back so no one would notice, and I walked out the side door before they served dessert. I didn't slam the door, I didn't make a scene. I just disappeared. No one stopped me. No one followed me. That was what finally broke me. The realization that no one in that room even noticed I was gone. And if they did, they didn't care enough to check. I sat in the car, engine running, my hands gripping the steering wheel like it was the last piece of reality I had left. I thought about going straight home and drinking myself to sleep, but I didn't. I drove to the office. It was almost midnight when I pulled into the parking lot and walked into the building I had built from the ground up. The cleaning crew gave me a strange look, but no one said anything. I went straight to my office. I sat in my leather chair and pulled up her employee file, the one with her name on it, the name I had given her, the one I used to write on birthday cakes and school report cards and ballet recital programs. I stared at it for a long time. Then I opened a new window and sent an email to my lawyer. Effective immediately, remove my daughter from the will. Schedule a meeting this week to review all estate documents. I hit send before I could change my mind. After that, I made a list, a literal list with a pen and paper, of every asset she had access to, the company car, the bank cards linked to the family account, the house I had co-signed for her 2 years ago, and her executive position at the company. By the time the sun came up, the list had become a checklist, each item marked with a red X. I wasn't acting out of rage. This wasn't an emotional outburst. It was pure, brutal clarity. If I meant nothing to her, I would stop living as if I did. She had made her choice. Now I was making mine. I drove back home as the sky lightened. No music, no distractions, just the hum of the tires on the asphalt and the last remnants of the love I still had for her slowly draining out of me. It wasn't that I didn't love her anymore, I did. God help me, I still do. But love without boundaries isn't love, it's servitude. And I had reached my limit. The morning arrived without ceremony, no birds singing, no warm sunlight streaming through the window, just a dull, gray light that made the house feel colder than it actually was. I hadn't slept that night. I lay down for a few hours, but my body never settled. My mind was a freight train of images, her growing up, the missing teeth, the tiny backpacks, the scraped knees, the tearful hugs, all of it crashing into the sound of her voice from the night before, praising the man who had simply shown up late and reaped the rewards I had bled for. I couldn't stop hearing that line, "He's the best thing that ever happened to me." I wondered if she had ever said that about me. I wondered if the weight I carried so she wouldn't have to ever crossed her mind. And when I realized it probably hadn't, something inside me closed, like a vault door sealing itself shut for good. By 6 a.m., I was at my desk. The first call was to the family lawyer. I didn't stammer. I didn't hesitate. Take her out of the will, effective immediately, I told him. We'll review the rest of the changes when I come in this week. He paused. He's known us for years. He helped me draft the original documents when she still had braces. Are you sure? He asked cautiously. She's your only child. I looked out the window and replied, I've given her everything. If that wasn't enough, my legacy won't be either. I hung up before he could respond. I knew what he was thinking, but I also knew this wasn't about revenge. It was about survival. And I was done bleeding myself dry for someone who couldn't even offer me a moment of gratitude on a night that was supposed to be about her, and in a way, about us. Next came the business part. I opened the HR system and accessed her profile. She had been working with me since she graduated Vice President of Client Relations, a title I created for her, not because she wasn't capable, but because I wanted her to have a place in the empire I had built. I trained her, I shielded her, I even defended her from the internal politics she didn't even know existed. And she was good at it, efficient, articulate, well-liked. But she was also careless, entitled, convinced that being my daughter made her untouchable. So I revoked her access. Right then and there. I locked her out of her corporate email, cancelled the company credit cards, and had the company car deactivated with a single call to the fleet manager. I stood there, tapping a pen on my desk, and then I sent a one-line email. As of today, your employment has been terminated. Details to follow. I should have felt something. Guilt, maybe. Sadness. But the only thing I felt was a strange relief, as if I had been holding up a crumbling ceiling for years and finally just let it go. That was the truth. I had allowed her to believe that love meant never being held accountable. And somewhere along the way, I had started to believe it too. I just kept giving, hoping that would earn me something more permanent than gratitude. But that's the trick of parenthood. It's not a transaction. You don't get a guaranteed return. And some children, no matter how much you love them, will still choose someone else if they believe your love is a given, even when the only thing you're asking for is respect. When I was done with the company matters, I turned my attention to the house. I had given it to her 2 years ago. I co-signed with the kind of pride only a father can feel watching his little girl start her own life. 3 bedrooms in a safe, gated neighborhood, with a backyard big enough for the dog she swore she'd get but never did. I paid the taxes, the maintenance, the utilities. She called it her space, and I let her believe it because she was still my daughter, because I thought I was investing in a bond that was unbreakable. That morning, I called the real estate agent who handled most of my commercial properties. List the house, I told her. Open market price, effective next month. She asked if I was sure. It's in her name, I could hear her shuffling through files. Not anymore, I replied. The title was never officially transferred. She never completed the final paperwork. It's still mine. I want to sell it. I didn't warn her. I didn't give her a heads up. She would find out soon enough, when the locks were changed or when the listing went live online. At that point, the shock would be hers to own. She had spent years reaping the rewards of my labor without ever stopping to ask how the tree was doing. So no, I didn't feel the need to soften the blow. I had spent too many years cushioning everything for her, making sure she never felt the sharp edges of the world. But if she could stand in a room full of people and act like I didn't matter, then she could damn well stand in line at a rental office and figure out her next move. By 10 a.m., my phone started ringing. First came the texts friends who had been at the dinner, co-workers who had heard rumors about the sudden termination, a few emails from board members politely asking for clarification. But I ignored them all until her number flashed on the screen. I let it ring. I waited until it went to voicemail. She called again, and again. On the 4th call, I answered, not out of weakness, but because I wanted her to hear the steel in my voice. "What the hell is going on?" she blurted out, no greeting, no apology, just pure, unadulterated entitlement and rage. "I can't access my company account. My cards are being declined. Someone said I've been fired." I leaned back in my chair. "That's correct," I said, as calm as ever. "You have been terminated. Access revoked. The house will be listed for sale. The car will be repossessed tomorrow." There was a pause, longer than I expected. Then a bitter, angry laugh. Are you serious? You're doing all this because I brought my stepfather to dinner. I almost laughed too. No, I said. I'm doing this because last night I realized that I mean nothing to you, and I've decided to stop pretending that I do. Then she started yelling, accusing me of being dramatic, of sabotaging her life, of being jealous, just as she had before. Go to him, I told her. You made it clear who matters. Let him be the one to help you now. Then I hung up, and this time, she didn't call back. The consequences don't arrive all at once. They're not like a car crash with shattered glass and sirens. They seep in like a gas leak, silent, slow, and invisible, until something sparks and everything explodes. The day after I cut her off, I could already feel the air around me changing. I walked into the office as usual, wearing the same tailored suit, carrying the same black coffee from the same corner shop, but there was a quietness that followed me, thick and unnatural. People avoided my gaze. Whispers stopped when I walked by. I could feel their eyes on my back, as if they were trying to decide if I was cruel or brave. That's the problem with public decisions. Everyone has an opinion, even those who weren't there to watch the story unfold. By noon, 2 department heads came into my office under the pretense of weekly updates. They danced around the subject like amateur actors in a play they didn't believe in. Just wondering what the plan is for the client transition, now that, well, your daughter is no longer in the picture. I answered calmly. Her accounts will be reassigned. I've already hired a temporary replacement. Permanent positions will be filled next quarter. They nodded, their eyes shifting uncomfortably, as if they wanted to say something more but couldn't summon the courage. And then came the question I had been waiting for. Are you okay? I looked up from my laptop and met his eyes. I'm not here to be okay. I'm here to run a company. That shut him up. He left, muttering let us know if you need anything, and the door closed behind him like a period at the end of a sentence. But it didn't end there. The real fallout began when the story leaked not through press releases or formal statements, but through the ever-reliable and ruthless network of social media. Someone, maybe a friend of hers or a coworker, a loyalist, posted a thread. It didn't mention names directly, but anyone who knew us could connect the dots. It painted me as a controlling father, a man who couldn't handle his daughter having another father figure. Imagine being punished for loving someone else, one tweet read. Another added, he fired his own daughter over a dinner speech. What kind of man does that? The likes piled up, the comments were merciless. I sat at my desk and watched it unfold like a slow-motion train wreck, and I didn't respond. Not because I didn't care, but because I had already chosen silence as my shield. My assistant, Rachel, knocked softly on my door that afternoon. She's been with me for 10 years. She's seen me through the good and the bad, through my wife leaving, through my daughter's college years. She came in with her usual clipboard, but I noticed something different in the way she hesitated before sitting down. Are you sure you don't want to say anything publicly? She asked gently. Even just a statement to clarify. I shook my head. If people want to believe I'm the villain, let them. I'm not in the business of begging for sympathy. She looked at me for a long time before nodding and saying, you're allowed to be hurt, you know. Even when you're right. And she left me alone with that uncomfortable truth. It wasn't just the company. My personal phone wouldn't stop vibrating. My sister texted me, furious. Are you seriously cutting off your own daughter over a comment? You've lost your mind. I didn't reply. She hadn't been there. She hadn't seen the years of slow erosion, the 1,000 tiny cuts that finally left me dry. Then came a call from my ex-wife. Voicemail, of course. Her voice was laced with sarcasm and ill-disguised satisfaction. I guess you're happy now. You humiliated her in front of everyone. Took everything away from her like a spoiled child. She chose love, and you chose pride. I hope you sleep well. I deleted the message before it finished. She had no right to talk about choices. She had walked away from the hard ones years ago and only reappeared when the hard work was already done. And then, a few days later, the most unexpected thing happened. A knock on my door. It was a Friday evening. I opened it to find Jeremy, one of the younger employees, someone I had barely exchanged greetings with in the hallway. He stood there awkwardly, holding a six-pack of beer like a peace offering. "I know this is weird," he said quickly, "but I read what people are saying online, and I just wanted to tell you that I get it. My dad did the same thing. He chose silence when my mom remarried. Everyone called him bitter, but over time, I understood he was just tired. Just done." He looked at me with something close to admiration. "Anyway, you don't have to drink this with me. I just thought you needed a reminder that not everyone thinks you're the bad guy." I let him in. We didn't talk much. We just sat on the back patio, drinking beer and watching the silent night. It was the first time in days I didn't feel like I was about to collapse. And it reminded me that stories, especially family ones, always have more sides than the ones that get the loudest applause. People want simple villains, but families are never simple. They are a layered mess of truths no one wants to say out loud, like the fact that sometimes love has to end before resentment can begin. Or that a father can do everything right and still be seen as the enemy when he finally says, "Enough." That weekend, I put my phone away. I walked in the park. I saw a man teaching his son how to ride a bike, and I felt a pang that almost took my breath away. I had done that too, holding the seat as she wobbled down the sidewalk, cheering her on until she finally took off on her own. I had taught her how to drive, how to do her taxes, how to negotiate her first job offer. I had given her everything I had, and it still wasn't enough to earn a single mention in her list of important people. So no, I didn't regret walking away. I regretted waiting so long. The funny thing about silence is that it doesn't stay quiet forever. At first, it feels like peace, like the world has finally stopped spinning long enough for you to catch your breath. But after a few days, maybe a week, the silence starts to echo. And in that echo, you hear all the versions of yourself that ever existed: the father, the protector, the doormat, the fool, the man who held up the world for someone who didn't even thank him when he handed it to her, the man who finally let go. I thought that with distance, I would feel stronger, that cutting the cord would bring a clarity that only comes after a decisive action. And in some ways, it did. But that echo would slowly creep in at night, in the quiet moments between tasks, making me question everything I had already survived. The hardest part wasn't the public fallout. It wasn't the whispers at work or the gossipy texts from family. It wasn't even finding out through a mutual friend that my daughter had temporarily moved in with her mother and stepfather, as if to make the point hurt more. No, the hardest part was the private morning, the part no one sees, where I would sit alone in the kitchen with a cold cup of coffee in my hands, replaying old voicemails she had left me when she still needed my approval. "Dad, I got the part in the play." Or, "Call me when you can, I need help with my resume." Her voice always had that bright lilt when she was excited. It used to light me up inside, now it just echoed through the room like a ghost that refused to leave. I started to wonder, had I been too harsh? Was there a version of that dinner where I could have swallowed my pride and just moved on? Smiled through the speech, toasted to her happiness, and kept the relationship in exchange for burying my dignity one more time? Maybe. But every time I flirted with that regret, I came back to one truth. I had only asked for one thing. A single boundary that wasn't controlling or cruel. A single night where I could exist without being overshadowed. And she didn't just ignore it, she mocked it. She made a joke of it. She called him the guest of honor. She said he was the best thing that ever happened to her while I sat there, invisible, clinging to the memories of scraped knees and sleepless nights like a fool holding a losing lottery ticket. So no, I hadn't been harsh. I had been honest. Brutally, finally honest. And it was about time. Still, the guilt lingered. Not because I thought I was wrong, but because no matter how justified you are, cutting off your own child rips something out of you. It reprograms your instincts. For 25 years, I had been on alert for her. Every unknown number that called my phone, I thought it might be her in trouble. Every time the news mentioned an accident or a protest, I would scan the details for a connection. That didn't just turn off because I took her out of my will. It didn't disappear because her name was no longer on the payroll. The father in me was still alive, pacing in circles inside a locked room in my chest, wondering if I could ever shut him up completely. Then the email came. Not from her, but from her stepfather. A single line in the subject, "Can we talk?" For a second, I considered deleting it without opening it. I owed him nothing. But curiosity, or maybe something closer to rage, won out. I opened it. The message was short, almost clinical. "I know things are tense. I'm not trying to make it worse. I'd like to talk, man to man. No pressure." I leaned back in my chair. I read it over and over. No pressure. What a ridiculous phrase. This man had infiltrated my daughter's life like a virus, quiet, persistent, until he had taken over everything. And now he wanted to talk. Still, a part of me needed to hear what he had to say. Maybe because I wanted to confirm what I already believed, or maybe because I needed to look him in the eye and see if he even understood what he had helped destroy. We met at a coffee shop 2 days later. I chose the time and place. Neutral ground. I got there early, took the seat facing the door, and waited. When he walked in, he looked exactly as I remembered him, well-dressed, confident, the kind of man who never fumbles a handshake or says the wrong thing at a dinner party. He sat down, ordered a tea, and started with, "Thanks for meeting me." I didn't reply. I just looked at him, letting the silence do the heavy lifting. He shifted uncomfortably before finally saying, "She's hurting." I almost laughed. Hurting, I thought. Hurting while she was publicly erasing me by calling you the best thing that ever happened to her. He looked down at his cup. "That speech wasn't meant to hurt you," he said. She was emotional, off the cuff. She wasn't thinking. I cut him off. No, she wasn't thinking. And now she gets to live with that. He nodded slowly. "I'm not here to defend her, or myself. I just wanted you to know that she isn't as ungrateful as it seemed." I narrowed my eyes. Then maybe she should have said something. One sentence, at least. He held up a hand. "I agree. She was wrong, seriously wrong. But cutting her off like this, completely. It's shattered her." I leaned forward, my voice low and sharp. "I spent 25 years shielding her from the world. You think she's shattered? She's barely feeling what it's like to be on her own. Welcome to adulthood." We sat in silence for a moment before he said, "She'll never apologize to you. She's too proud, too hurt. But I thought you should know. She does love you, she's just lost," I said, shaking my head. Confused. "No. She's simply made her choice, and now she gets to live with it." He didn't argue. He just nodded, left money for his tea, and stood up. "I hope it doesn't stay this way," he said. "For her sake, and for yours." I didn't answer. I watched him walk away, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel rage toward him. Just indifference. And that, in a way, was progress. There's a strange thing about peace when it finally arrives. It doesn't knock on the door. It doesn't announce itself with a sunrise or a cinematic moment of clarity. It just shows up. One morning, I was in my kitchen, pouring coffee into my favorite mug, the one my daughter painted for me when she was 11, with the words, "World's Best Dad," written in lopsided, rounded letters, and I didn't feel empty anymore. I didn't jump when my phone buzzed. I wasn't compulsively checking my email, waiting for another attack or another plea. The house was quiet, but for the first time, it didn't feel empty. It felt like mine. And that peace wasn't loud, but it was final, like a door closing without needing to be slammed to make its point. In the weeks that followed that coffee shop meeting with her stepfather, I kept waiting for some grand Justurian apology, a text, a voicemail, something to hint that she saw the fracture and wanted to fix it. But nothing came. And eventually, I stopped waiting. Not out of spite, but because I understood that I wasn't the one who owed anything. For 25 years, I had been the safety net, the soft place to land, the one who answered every call, solved every crisis, and forgave every offense before it had a chance to fully sting. I had given her that power, thinking that was love, thinking that was what good fathers did. But love without boundaries isn't love, it's desperation disguised as devotion. And I was finally free of it. Some of my friends still tiptoed around the subject. A few even pulled me aside gently, especially the ones with kids of their own, to suggest reconciliation. "You don't want to look back and regret this," one of them told me. I looked him straight in the eye and replied, "I've already spent a decade regretting how much I gave without ever asking what I was getting back." He nodded, not in agreement, but in understanding. I didn't need validation from anyone anymore. That's what happens when you finally draw a line in the sand and decide not to move it. Even when the waves crash, you stop asking people to applaud your decisions. You just make them and live with the peace they bring, or the silence they cost. I sold the house she had been living in. It sold quickly, prime neighborhood, clean title, newly renovated. I drove by it one last time before the new owners moved in. I didn't get out of the car. I just stared at the front door from across the street. I used to carry her groceries up that porch. I helped her hang lights every Christmas. There were still faded chalk drawings on the side path, remnants of a visit from one of her friend's kids. I took a deep breath and whispered, "Thank you," into the interior of the car. No, to her, not to myself, but to the space, to the time, to the version of me that had existed inside that home. Hopeful, striving, always giving. Then I started the car and drove away. I haven't been back since. At work, things settled. The board stopped asking questions. The whispers died down. Rachel, my assistant, told me that several employees had quietly expressed their support. "They don't know the whole story," she said. "But when they saw you keep showing up, keep leading, keep treating everyone fairly, they stopped second-guessing your side of it." I nodded, grateful but serene. I wasn't trying to win hearts. I was just trying to live honestly again. And for the first time in years, I was. I no longer carried the weight of unspoken resentment into meetings. I no longer censored my thoughts before I spoke them. I no longer bent myself into a more agreeable shape just to keep a peace that was never mutual. I stood taller. I breathed deeper. I finally stopped apologizing for asking to be treated like I mattered. She did reach out once, about 6 weeks after it all fell apart. It was a text message, short, dry. "Can we talk?" No apology, no context. Just 3 words. I looked at it for a long time. A part of me, a deep, wounded part, wanted to answer immediately, to run back to her no matter how far I had walked to get here. But the wiser part of me knew better. It knew that no real conversation ever begins with silence, disrespect, and then a demand. I didn't reply. Not because I hated her, but because I loved myself enough not to run back to the same door she had closed in my face. She gave her toast. She chose her words. Now she could live with the taste of them in her mouth for a while longer. I haven't blocked her number. I haven't cut her out of my heart for good. But I have stopped making myself available to people who treat my presence like background noise. I have stopped being the cushion for their unexamined emotions. If she ever wants to speak to me again, she'll have to do it right, with clarity, with honesty, and with no entitlement at all. I won't beg for it. I won't wait for it. I won't even hope for it in silence. And maybe that's the most honest I've ever been about our relationship. I was the doormat once, but not anymore. I keep that mug on a shelf now, the one she painted when she still saw me as the center of her world. I don't use it, not because I'm angry, but because some things are meant to be reminders, not open wounds. That mug is a relic of a simpler time, before adult egos and shifting loyalties turned love into something negotiable. Sometimes I look at it while I'm working or cooking alone. And I don't feel bitterness. I feel closure. I did everything I could, and when that wasn't enough, I did the hardest thing a parent can do. I let her go.